the first thing I tasted when I stepped off the train in Siena was failure. It was bitter, acrid, and clung to the back of my throat like the dusty Tuscan air. I was already 15 minutes late for my first day at Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco, and my nonna's voice rang in my ears. Kathleen Marie Romano. A chef is never late to her own kitchen. I hitched my duffel bag higher on my shoulder and broke into a run, my sneakers pounding against the sun-baked cobblestones. The streets of Siena twisted and turned like strands of pasta, and I found myself hopelessly lost within minutes. Sweat trickled down my back, and I silently cursed my decision to wear jeans instead of shorts for the journey. A half hour and 3 wrong turns later, I finally stumbled into the small piazza, where Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco nestled between a gelato shop and a boutique selling handmade leather goods. The restaurant's weathered sign creaked in the warm breeze, depicting a white boar, the Cinghiale Bianco of its name. I paused to catch my breath, straightened my wrinkled t-shirt, and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The interior was dim and cool compared to the bright Tuscan sun outside. The scent of garlic, herbs, and simmering tomato sauce enveloped me, instantly reminding me of Sunday dinners at my grandparents' house in New Jersey. "Say in ritardo." The gruff voice startled me, and I spun around to face a man with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His white chef's coat was impeccable, and his dark eyes scrutinized me with disapproval. "I'm sorry," I stammered, my mind racing to recall the Italian phrases I'd practiced on the flight. Sono in ritardo. Mi dispiace." He raised an eyebrow. "American?" I nodded, relief washing over me. "Yes, I'm Katie Romano. I'm here for the summer internship." "Ah, la stagista americana." He wiped his hands on a towel tucked into his apron strings. "I am Chef Alessio Bianchi. You are 45 minutes late on your first day. This is not an auspicious beginning, Signorina Romano." My cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Chef. I got lost and—" He held up a hand, cutting me off. "No excuses. In my kitchen, punctuality is as important as seasoning. Now, go change into your uniform. We have work to do." I nodded, biting back the explanations that threatened to spill out. As I followed him through the kitchen, the clamor of pots and pans and the sizzle of ingredients hitting hot oil filled the air. My fingers itched to grab a knife, to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of chopping and stirring. Chef Alessio pointed to a small changing room off to the side. "Be quick. We open for lunch service in 30 minutes." I changed into my chef's whites in record time, cinching the apron tightly around my waist and pulling my long dark hair into a tight bun. When I emerged, Chef Alessio was waiting, tapping his foot impatiently. "Your station is here," he said, gesturing to a small prep area. "Start by julienning these zucchini for the fritti misti. And Signorina Romano?" I looked up from the pile of vegetables. "Yes, chef?" "Do not disappoint me again." With that, he strode away, barking orders in rapid-fire Italian to the other cooks. I picked up a knife, its weight familiar and comforting in my hand, and got to work. The next few hours passed in a blur of chopping, stirring, and plating. Despite my rocky start, I fell into the rhythm of the kitchen easily. It wasn't so different from the bustling restaurants I'd worked in back in New York City, except for the lilting Italian that surrounded me instead of rapid-fire English and Spanish. As the lunch rush died down, I finally had a moment to catch my breath. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand and surveyed the kitchen. Chef Alessio was at the pass, inspecting each dish before it went out to the dining room. His keen eyes missed nothing, and I'd already seen him send back 2 plates for minor imperfections. "Hey, Americana," a cheerful voice called out, and I turned to see a young woman about my age grinning at me. Her curly hair escaped from beneath her chef's hat, and her round cheeks were flushed from the heat of the kitchen. "I'm Julia. Welcome to the madhouse." I smiled back, grateful for the friendly face. "Thanks. I'm Katie." "So, what brings you to Siena?" "Besides our charming Chef Alessio, of course," she said with a wink. I laughed, glancing over my shoulder to make sure the chef in question wasn't within earshot. "I'm here for the summer. It's an internship program through my culinary school in New York. Julia's eyes lit up. New York? I've always wanted to visit. Is it true that the pizza there is better than in Italy? I held up my hands in mock surrender. I wouldn't dare make that claim on Italian soil, but it is pretty good. She laughed, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. Listen, a bunch of us are going out for drinks after work. You should come. We can show you around Siena, help you get your bearings so you're not late again tomorrow. The teasing note in her voice took any sting out of the words, and I found myself nodding. That sounds great, actually. Thanks. Basta chiacchiere. Chef Alessio's sharp voice cut through our conversation. Back to work, both of you. The dinner prep waits for no one. Julia rolled her eyes good-naturedly and returned to her station. I turned back to my own prep work, but my spirits were lighter than they had been all day. Maybe this summer wouldn't be a complete disaster after all. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly, and before I knew it, the dinner service was over, and we were cleaning up the kitchen. My feet ached and my back was sore from hours of standing, but there was a sense of satisfaction thrumming through me. I'd survived my first day in an Italian kitchen, even if it hadn't started out perfectly. As I hung up my apron, Julia appeared at my side. Ready to go? The others are waiting outside. I nodded, suddenly nervous. It had been a long time since I'd been the new girl, trying to make friends. But Julia's warm smile put me at ease as we stepped out into the balmy Tuscan night. A small group was gathered in the piazza, laughing and chatting. Julia made quick introductions. There was Mario, the pastry chef with a mop of curly hair, Sophia, a server with a melodious laugh, and Antonio, a line cook with kind eyes and a shy smile. We wandered through the winding streets of Siena, the golden streetlights casting a warm glow on the ancient buildings. The others pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the city's history. I found myself relaxing, caught up in their easy camaraderie. We ended up at a small enoteca tucked away on a side street. The owner, a jovial man named Giuseppe, greeted Julia and the others like old friends. They quickly explained that I was the new American intern at Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco, and Giuseppe's eyes twinkled with interest. Ah, so you're the one who got lost this morning, he said in accented English. All of Siena was talking about the American girl running through the streets with a suitcase. I groaned, hiding my face in my hands as the others laughed. Great, I've been here less than a day and I'm already infamous. Giuseppe patted my shoulder sympathetically. Don't worry, Bella. Siena has a way of making everyone feel at home eventually. Now, what would you like to drink? I have a wonderful Vernaccia di San Gimignano that just came in. As Giuseppe poured our wine, I found myself drawn into conversation with Antonio. His English was hesitant at first, but as we talked about our shared love of cooking, he became more animated. So, what made you want to come to Italy for your internship? He asked, taking a sip of his wine. I traced the rim of my glass, considering the question. Honestly, I wanted to connect with my roots. My nonna, my grandmother. She's from a small town near Naples. She taught me how to cook, but I've never actually been to Italy before. I guess I wanted to see where it all came from, you know? Antonio nodded, his expression thoughtful. And what do you think so far? I looked around at the warm, inviting space of the enoteca, at the new friends laughing and sharing stories around me, and smiled. It's not what I expected, but I think I'm going to like it here. As the night wore on and the wine flowed freely, I found myself relaxing more than I had in months. The stress of finishing culinary school, of competing for this internship, of leaving everything familiar behind, it all seemed to melt away in the face of Tuscan hospitality and newfound friendships. It was well past midnight when we finally said our goodbyes. Julia insisted on walking me back to my apartment, claiming it was on her way home. As we strolled through the quiet streets, she linked her arm through mine. So, Katie from New York? She said, her words slightly slurred from the wine. What do you think of our little Siena? I looked up at the starry sky, so much clearer here than in the light-polluted New York nights I was used to. It's beautiful, I said honestly. I can't wait to explore more of it. Julia squeezed my arm. Well, you're in luck. Tomorrow is your day off, right? I'm meeting some friends for a picnic in the countryside. You should come. I hesitated. As much as I wanted to accept, I knew I should use my day off to get organized, to study Italian, to prepare for the grueling weeks ahead in Chef Alessio's kitchen. Julia must have sensed my hesitation because she added, Come on, it'll be fun. And Marco will be there. He owns a vineyard just outside the city. You two would get along great, I think. Something in her tone made me raise an eyebrow. Are you trying to set me up, Julia? She laughed, not even attempting to look innocent. Maybe a little. But mostly, I just want you to see more of Tuscany than the inside of the restaurant kitchen. Life is short, Katie from New York. Sometimes you have to say yes to adventure. As we reached my apartment building, I found myself nodding. You know what? You're right. Count me in. Julia's face lit up with a grin. Perfetto. I'll pick you up at 11. Bring a swimsuit. There's a little lake near Marco's vineyard. With a quick hug and a promise to see me in the morning, Julia disappeared into the night. I climbed the stairs to my tiny apartment, my head spinning with more than just wine. As I collapsed into bed, I couldn't help but smile. My first day in Siena had been a roller coaster, but somehow I had a feeling the rest of the summer was going to be even more interesting. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the small window of my apartment. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar sounds of Siena filtering up from the street below. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. My disastrous arrival, the intensity of the kitchen, the warmth of new friendships. I stretched, wincing at the soreness in my muscles from hours of kitchen work. A glance at my phone showed several missed calls from my parents and a text from Julia confirming our plans for the day. With a groan, I hauled myself out of bed and into the tiny shower, letting the cool water wash away the last vestiges of sleep and wine-induced haziness. As I got dressed, I called my mom, knowing she'd be worried if I didn't check in soon. Katie? Her voice was a mixture of relief and concern. We've been trying to reach you. Is everything okay? I cradled the phone between my ear and shoulder as I rummaged through my suitcase for a swimsuit. Everything's fine, Mom. Sorry I didn't call yesterday. It was a crazy first day. Oh no, what happened? Did you make it to the restaurant on time? I winced, debating whether to tell her the truth. In the end, I decided honesty was the best policy. Not exactly. I got a little lost. Oh, Katie. I could practically hear her shaking her head. Didn't you use the map I printed out for you? I tried, Mom, but Siena's streets are like a maze. It's not like the grid system in New York. She sighed. Well, I hope you made a better impression after that. What's the chef like? Is he as good as they say? I thought about Chef Alessio's stern demeanor and exacting standards. He's intense, but I think I'm going to learn a lot from him. We chatted for a few more minutes, with me reassuring her that yes, I was eating enough. And no, I hadn't gotten pickpocketed or kidnapped by the Italian mafia. When I mentioned my plans for the day, she seemed pleased. That's wonderful that you're making friends already, she said. And a vineyard tour sounds lovely. Just be careful, okay? Don't drink too much wine and fall into a vat or something. I rolled my eyes, even though she couldn't see me. I'll be fine, Mom. I'm a responsible adult, remember? After promising to call again soon, I hung up and finished getting ready. By the time Julia arrived, honking cheerfully from a beat-up Fiat parked haphazardly on the narrow street, I was dressed in a sundress over my swimsuit, a wide-brimmed hat jammed on my head to protect against the Tuscan sun. Buongiorno, Julia called out as I approached the car. Ready for your first real taste of Tuscany? I climbed into the passenger seat, grinning. Absolutely. Lead the way. As we drove out of Siena, the cityscape gave way to rolling hills covered in vineyards and olive groves. The countryside was a patchwork of greens and golds, dotted with the dark spires of cypress trees. It was like driving through a postcard, and I found myself falling in love with Tuscany all over again. So, Julia said, deftly maneuvering the car around a sharp turn. Tell me more about New York. What made you want to become a chef? I watched the scenery roll by as I considered the question. I guess it started with my nonna. She always said that food was love made visible. I grew up helping her in the kitchen, learning all her secret recipes. But it wasn't until high school that I really thought about making it a career. What changed? I smiled, remembering. There was this fundraiser at school. We had to make something to sell, and I decided to make my nonna's cannoli. They were a huge hit. I sold out within an hour. And watching people enjoy something I'd made, seeing how food could bring people together, I don't know, something just clicked. Julia nodded. I understand. It's the same for me. Cooking is like creating magic, no? You take these simple ingredients, and with skill and love, you transform them into something beautiful. Exactly, I said, feeling a surge of kinship with her. That's why I wanted to come to Italy. I wanted to learn from the source, to understand the roots of the cuisine I grew up with. She glanced at me, her expression thoughtful. And what do you want to do after your internship? I hesitated. This was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that had kept me up at night for months. I'm not sure, I admitted. Before I left New York, I thought I knew. I was going to work my way up in a Michelin-starred restaurant, maybe open my own place someday. But now, Julia prompted gently. I shrugged, feeling suddenly vulnerable. Now I'm not so sure. Being here, seeing how food and life are so intertwined, it's making me question everything I thought I wanted. Julia reached over and squeezed my hand. That's not a bad thing, Sometimes we need to get lost to find our true path. Her words stayed with me as we arrived at Marco's vineyard. The gravel driveway led up to a stunning Tuscan villa. The house was a vision of weathered stone and terracotta, with climbing vines adorning its walls and cypress trees standing nearby. As we pulled up, a group of people waved to us from a shaded patio area. Julia parked the car and led me over to the group. Everyone, this is Katie, our American friend from Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco, she announced. Katie, meet the gang. I was introduced to a whirlwind of names and faces. There was Luca, an artist with paint-stained hands, Elena, a literature professor with sparkling eyes, and Francesca, a local journalist with a quick wit. But it was the last introduction that caught me off guard. And this, Julia said with a sly smile, is Marco, our host and resident wine expert. Marco stepped forward and I felt my breath catch. He was tall and lean, with olive skin, dark curly hair, and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His smile was warm and genuine as he extended his hand. Benvenuta, Katie, he said, his voice a rich baritone. Welcome to Vigna del Sole. I shook his hand, hoping he couldn't feel the slight tremor in mine. Thank you for having me. Your home is beautiful. He looked pleased. Grazie. It's been in my family for generations. Shall I give you a tour of the vineyard before we eat? I nodded, suddenly eager to learn more about this place and its owner. As we set off down a row of grapevines, Marco began explaining the history of the vineyard and the types of grapes they grew. His passion for winemaking was evident in every word, and I found myself hanging on every syllable. So, Katie, he said as we paused to admire a particularly lush cluster of grapes. Julia tells me you're a chef. What brought you to Tuscany? I explained about my internship and my desire to connect with my Italian heritage. Marco listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about my experiences in New York and my goals for the future. It sounds like you're at a crossroads, he observed as we made our way back to the villa. I nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness. I guess I am. I came here thinking I knew exactly what I wanted. But now, I'm not so sure. Marco's smile was understanding. Tuscany has a way of changing people. There's something about this land, the rhythm of life here. It makes you question what's truly important. As we rejoined the others, I found myself pondering his words. The afternoon unfolded in a haze of delicious food, flowing wine, and easy conversation. We feasted on a spread of local specialties, prosciutto and melon, panzanella salad, fresh figs drizzled with honey. Marco brought out bottles of wine from his cellar, explaining the unique characteristics of each as we sipped and savored. After lunch, we made our way down to the small lake Julia had mentioned. The cool water was a welcome relief from the afternoon heat, and soon we were all splashing and laughing like children. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years, the stress and pressure of my life in New York feeling increasingly distant. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the vineyard, Marco approached me with 2 glasses of wine. "One last tasting before you go," he said, handing me a glass. "This is a special vintage from the year I took over the vineyard from my father." I took a sip, closing my eyes to fully appreciate the flavors. It was complex and beautifully balanced, with notes of cherry and spice. "It's amazing," I said honestly. Marco smiled, pleased. "I'm glad you like it. You know, Katie, I was thinking, if you're interested in learning more about Tuscan cuisine, I host cooking classes here at the vineyard sometimes. We use ingredients from our garden, pair the dishes with our wines. You'd be welcome to join us." I felt a flutter of excitement at the idea. "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to." "Excellent," he said, his eyes twinkling. "And perhaps you could share some of your New York culinary expertise with us in return?" I laughed. I'm not sure how much expertise I have, but I'd be happy to try. As Julia and I said our goodbyes and headed back to Siena, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. The day had been perfect, full of new experiences, new friendships, and new possibilities. "So," Julia said as we drove, a knowing smile on her face, "what did you think of Marco?" I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "He seems nice, very knowledgeable about wine." Julia laughed. "Oh, is that all? I saw the way you two were looking at each other. I think there might be a little spark there." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. "We just met, Julia. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." But as we drove back into Siena, the golden light of the setting sun painting the city in warm hues, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Whatever this summer held, in the kitchen, in my career, or in my personal life, I was ready to embrace it with open arms. The next morning, I woke early, determined to make a better second impression at Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco. I arrived at the restaurant a full 30 minutes before my shift was set to begin, earning an approving nod from Chef Alessio. "Bene, Signorina Romano," he said as I tied on my apron. "Punctuality is the first step towards excellence in the kitchen." The day passed in a whirlwind of chopping, sautéing, and plating. I threw myself into every task, determined to prove my worth. By the end of the shift, my feet were aching and my back was sore, but I felt a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't experienced in a long time. As I was hanging up my apron, Chef Alessio approached me. "Your cannelloni al ragu was good today," he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Tomorrow I want you to work on perfecting the bechamel sauce. It was a touch too thick." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride at the compliment and determination to do better. "Yes, chef. Thank you." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. My days were spent in the hot, bustling kitchen of Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco, absorbing every bit of knowledge I could from Chef Alessio and the other cooks. In the evenings, I explored Siena with Julia and the others, slowly falling in love with the city's winding streets and hidden piazzas. And then there was Marco. True to his word, he invited me to join one of his cooking classes at the vineyard. It was a revelation. We made pici, a thick, hand-rolled pasta typical of the region, tossing it with a simple sauce of fresh tomatoes and basil from Marco's garden. As we cooked, Marco shared stories about growing up on the vineyard, about the traditions and techniques passed down through generations of his family. "Cooking is about more than just following a recipe," he said as we sat down to enjoy our meal, paired with a crisp white wine from his cellar. "It's about understanding the ingredients, respecting their flavors and textures. It's about creating something that nourishes not just the body, but the soul." His words resonated deeply with me, reminding me of the lessons my nonna had taught me all those years ago. As we talked late into the night, sharing our passion for food and wine, I felt something shift inside me. It was as if I was seeing my chosen career path in a new light, understanding for the first time the true depth and richness of culinary tradition. But even as I was falling in love with Tuscany and its cuisine, doubts began to creep in. My internship was half over, and I still had no clear plan for what I would do when I returned to New York. The idea of going back to the high-pressure world of Michelin-starred restaurants suddenly seemed less appealing. But what was the alternative? These thoughts were weighing heavily on my mind one evening as I worked on prep for the next day's service. I was so lost in my own head that I didn't notice Chef Alessio approaching until he spoke. "Your mind is not on your work, Signorina Romano," he said, his voice startling me out of my reverie. I looked down at the onions I had been dicing, realizing with embarrassment that my usually precise knife work was sloppy and uneven. "I'm sorry, Chef. I'll do it again." He waved away my apology. No, it's nearly closing time. Come sit with me for a moment." Surprised, I followed him to a small table in the corner of the kitchen. He poured 2 small glasses of grappa and pushed one towards me. "Now," he said, fixing me with his penetrating gaze, "tell me what's troubling you." I took a sip of the fiery spirit, gathering my thoughts. "I'm not sure what I want anymore," I admitted finally. "I came here thinking I knew exactly where my career was going, but now everything feels different." Chef Alessio nodded as if he had been expecting this. "It is the curse and the blessing of travel," he said. "It opens our eyes to new possibilities, but in doing so, it can make our old certainties feel less certain." I nodded, grateful that he seemed to understand. "So what should I do?" He considered for a moment, swirling the grappa in his glass. "When I was your age, I thought I wanted to be a famous chef in a big city restaurant. I worked in Paris and London, always chasing the next big opportunity. But do you know where I found true fulfillment?" I shook my head, hanging on his every word. "Here," he said, gesturing around the small, homey kitchen of Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco. "In this little restaurant in Siena, cooking the food of my homeland. Because here, I'm not just making fancy dishes for wealthy tourists. I'm preserving traditions, honoring the ingredients of this land, feeding people who appreciate the soul of the food." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "The point is, Signorina Romano, that success in our profession is not always about prestige or Michelin stars. It's about finding the place where your skills and your passion align with something greater than yourself." His words hit me like a revelation. I thought about the joy I'd felt cooking with Marco, about the satisfaction of mastering a traditional Tuscan dish, about the warmth of sharing a meal with new friends. Suddenly, the path forward seemed a little clearer. "Thank you, Chef," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I think I understand." He nodded, a rare smile softening his features. "Good. Now go home and get some rest. Tomorrow I'm going to teach you how to make the perfect ribollita, and I need you at your best." As I left the restaurant that night, the warm Tuscan air enveloping me like an embrace, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I was beginning to understand the questions. And for now, that was enough. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of culinary discoveries and personal growth. In the kitchen, I threw myself into learning every traditional Tuscan dish I could, pestering Chef Alessio and the other cooks for their family recipes and secret techniques. Outside of work, I spent more time with Marco, exploring local farmers markets and hidden trattorias, each experience deepening my understanding of and appreciation for the region's culinary heritage. As my internship neared its end, I found myself torn. The thought of leaving Siena, of saying goodbye to the friends I'd made and the life I'd begun to build here, was painful. But I also felt a new sense of purpose, a clarity about what I wanted to do next. It was on my last night in Siena that everything came to a head. Marco had invited me to dinner at the vineyard, promising a special farewell meal. As I arrived, the sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the rows of grapevines. Marco greeted me with a warm smile and a glass of his best Chianti. "Come," he said, leading me to a table set for 2 on the terrace. "I hope you're hungry." The meal was a celebration of everything I'd come to love about Tuscan cuisine. We started with a platter of local cheeses and cured meats, moved on to a perfect papa al pomodoro, then a main course of bistecca alla fiorentina that melted in my mouth. Each course was paired with a different wine from Marco's cellar, each sip telling the story of the land and the people who tended it. As we lingered over dessert, a heavenly torta della nonna, Marco reached across the table and took my hand. "Katie," he said, his eyes serious, "I have a confession to make." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I don't want you to go back to New York." I stared at him, a mix of emotions swirling through me. "Marco, He held up his hand, stopping me. "Let me finish. I've seen how you've flourished here, how you've connected with the food, the culture, the people. I think you belong here, Katie. And I think we could build something beautiful together." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he continued, his voice soft but sure, "that I want you to stay. We could expand the cooking classes at the vineyard, maybe even open a small restaurant showcasing the best of Tuscan and Italian-American cuisine. Your talent, your passion, combined with my knowledge of local ingredients and winemaking, I think we could create something truly special." For a moment, I was speechless. Everything Marco was proposing sounded like a dream come true. But could I really give up everything I'd worked for in New York? Could I start over in a new country, with a man I'd known for just a few months? "Marco," I said finally, my voice shaky. "I'm touched, truly. And what you're proposing sounds amazing. But I can't just abandon my life in New York, my family, my career. It's not that simple." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know it's a big decision. I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it, okay? Give yourself time to consider all the possibilities." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his patience and understanding. "I will. I promise." As I drove back to Siena that night, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Marco's proposal had forced me to confront the changes I'd been feeling all summer. I realized that somewhere along the way, between the bustling kitchen of Osteria del Cinghiale Bianco and the sun-drenched vineyards of Tuscany, I'd found a part of myself I didn't even know was missing. The next morning, as I packed my bags for the flight back to New York, I made a decision. I couldn't give Marco an answer yet. It was too soon, too big of a life change to commit to on the spot. But I also couldn't just walk away from the life I'd discovered here. I called the culinary school in New York and arranged to take a leave of absence for the next semester. Then I called my parents, explaining my plan to stay in Italy for a few more months, to explore this new path and see where it might lead. Finally, I texted Marco. "I'm not ready to say yes, but I'm not ready to say goodbye either. How about we give it 3 more months and see what happens?" His reply came almost instantly. "3 months sounds perfect. The vineyard and I will be waiting." As I walked through the streets of Siena one last time before heading to the airport, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility that I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew that whatever came next, it would be flavored with the rich, complex notes of Tuscan wine and seasoned with the warmth of Italian hospitality. My summer in Tuscany had started with the bitter taste of failure, but it was ending with the sweet promise of a new beginning. And I couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring. If you enjoy heartwarming, inspirational Southern stories, then pick up a copy of Ernest Dempsey's latest novel, The Final Round, through the link in the description. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from Magnolia Crossing when they're uploaded. Thanks for watching.